What's up, guys? This is Joe.
And Amy.
We are popping on here before this video starts just to let you know, if you haven't noticed, we're streaming now. So please feel free to check us out here on this very channel every Monday and Friday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. We would love to have you come join us, hop in the chat and talk if that's something you're into. But we are going to be playing a bunch of stuff on MTG Arena. If you have suggestions on stuff you'd like to see us play, the best way to do it, hop in chat, let us know, and we will see what we can do.
Yeah.
So that is every Monday and Friday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern going forward. This is something we're trying out, and we really hope that you all enjoy. But for now, on to the video. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our now back to weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And I say stories because now it's 2 a week.
Aha!
And so this week we are here to review both the first side story in Red Route, or Red Route, depending on how you choose to say it, by Miguel Lopez, as well as episode 2, Race to the Murasa Skyclave, once again by the returning A.T. Greenblatt. My quick reviews at the top. I enjoyed both of these stories this week. I thought that both of them were great. I thought the introduction of the side story, or reintroduction of the stories that focus on one legendary creature, or legendary character, was very good, especially. And I highly recommend that you check out both. I know you were a little bit more critical of last week's story, the mainline story, obviously, because this is the first side story that we're reviewing. But how did this week do
It was
for
fine.
you? Both of them.
No, the first one was great.
The side story.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the main story was just kind of meh.
Okay. But last week it bothered you, so this week it's gotten better.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean,
I wouldn't say it's gotten better, but I'll describe it.
you got it. So, as I said last week, and I believe we kind of both did, this is the return of the online stories, the weekly stories. The side stories are fantastic, and you should definitely check them out. Don't ignore them because they're not mainline stories, because...
Yeah, definitely don't.
Yes, because arguably they're better than the mainline stories. So...
I think so.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I think this week, out of the two of them, the Red Route was the stronger story. It just obviously... Well, actually, no. We'll talk about that, but actually does relevantly tie in to the mainline story. Whereas you could argue that the Ravnica ones, which is what we're going to have to compare it to at this point, the Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance stories that Nikki Drayden wrote on the website way back when, those are the only thing that we have to compare these to at this point, these side stories. And those were practically in no way connected. I think like Lazav showed up in like one or two of them, so like he was in the mainline story a bit, but otherwise there was no connection whatsoever with any of these other characters that we never saw again. This is different than that, and so that's even more impactful if you are the kind of person where you're like, I don't give a damn about these side stories. Okay. Just give me the Planeswalkers. Where's the Planeswalker stories? And these side stories matter now, at least, and I say that in terms of
they don't matter, they're good. So
that's why
decide that they matter.
Well, that's I tried to correct myself immediately. Yes, the matter is not what I meant. They connect to the mainline story more significantly in showing us these legendary creatures, at least so far. Right, we've only seen the first one, but this one does. So let's quickly talk about, well, first of all, we're going to go into the full reviews themselves. So if you have not checked those out, we encourage you to go do that because as we always say, we review, we do not summarize.
Yes.
So we encourage you to go read those. And then if you want to come back here and hang out with us, we'd appreciate it. And give us your opinions as well, because we would love to hear from you. For Red Route, this story was great, as Amy and I have said. It focused on Akiri and Zareth. So if you didn't read this story and you read the main story, that should clue you in. Those names should sound familiar regardless. It started off with core line swinging, which we know is a thing. That's how the core get around on these floating, rocky, craggy locations on Zendikar. Here it was a gorge that they were going through. And there was absolutely amazing descriptions by Miguel Lopez here on that line swinging. You get to get a bit more of a perspective from Akiri in terms of why she line swings, what she is experiencing when she line swings. She talked about the fact that on the apex of the swing, when you're a bit in like free fall almost, or you're like floating for a second before you're in free fall. She talks about the fact that there's always a little bit of fear because you could die, and she mentions she would become one of the many core that fall victim to to falling into a coom, I believe. And so she references that she's fully aware of the fact that if she screws this up, she's dead. And yet when she is at that apex and she is just there floating, waiting, having pulled back her first line and just waiting to hook the second one to come down on, she's serene. She's relaxed. She's kind of experiencing the world around her, connecting to her people, right? And how she's grown up. And again, there's the fear there as well. But then you contrast it with Xerath here, who interjects and is like screaming and cheering and whooping because he's getting the adrenaline rush, right? Like, and there are people like that. Maybe you know people like that. I don't know that I do, to be honest. Know like adrenaline junkies, right? Who are like into doing like extreme sports and stuff like that, where they just get a rush from it, and that's something that they enjoy. Or it's more serene for them. I don't want to keep going too far if you have anything to say on that. But
no.
Okay. What I love is the name of the story, Red Root. I guess for people that don't know, if people care, I was in scouting most of my young and then into young adult and adult life. And so it very much reminds me, Red Root and the every story that they're talking about here, reminds me of hiking and going on hiking trails. Red Root describes the coloration on these gorges for letting people know where to hook their lines, right? Hook them here, go through this way, etc. And I like that a lot. And they talk even about the fact that the red route is difficult. And Akiri mentions to Xerath, you did a good job, but you got to work on some things. So I'll take you on the green route tomorrow to practice. And that's the easier route. And we have both been on hikes before where it's like, you want to get to the top, there's two ways to do it. There's the easier way or the more challenging way. And you make the decision because you're going to end up in the same place at the top. It's just that you get to pick how you want to get there. Right? Do you want a challenge so that you feel that much more accomplished when you get to the top? Maybe you're doing it for exercise purposes or what have you, and that's more strenuous for you. Or maybe you're just doing it because you want to get to the top, you want to have a beautiful view, and that's the moment that you're looking for. You don't necessarily want to be like, blown out and sore and out of breath and etc. It's entirely up to you and what you want. And that's contrasted here in this story with the fact that Akiri mentions that the red route used to be, right, during the time of the Eldrazi and beasts on the plane in general, that the red route was what had to be taken to avoid them and to kind of be faster than them and get ahead of them and away from them. And now, in the line that I guess you'll maybe want to talk a little bit more about, where she says that now you can just do it for fun, or as they're doing here, as a bit of a competition with one another. And she says, a change for the better. And I know that you had some thoughts on that phrase.
I really did not like how they worked up to that, because they basically said, well, this used to be useful, and now it's only useful for people to be reckless and show off.
Okay.
And that is not an improvement.
Okay. I didn't fully take it that way. I don't like wholly disagree. I took it more as just the entire idea of like, hey, we're not fighting for our life every day anymore. You know, there's still beasts here, as we see in these stories over and over again. There's still the occasional beast that tries to kill you. That's just a thing. But it's not like world-ending catastrophes and war. And so I thought that was where she was going with it, but I thought that your take was interesting as well in terms of looking at it and being like, hey, why is this the way that you're kind of referencing this and wording this? So, okay. You had asked at one point as well, kind of asked me, and I was unsure, but then we got a clearer picture once the main story came in, asking when this side story was taking place. And it seemed obvious that it was after Oath of the Gatewatch, obviously, because the Eldrazi were gone. We knew this. But was it before these stories? And you had kind of alluded to thinking that it was before Nahiri starts messing everything up. Right?
Because I was like, there's no way that they would, like, start doing all this jumping around if they were just gonna, like, I doubt very highly that the story's just gonna, like, they're gonna write the story just so that they can be like, well, they're gonna go on this, like, journey, and then they start going on the journey, and then, you know, Nahiri finds the key or whatever, and just, like, and they just, like, plummet to their deaths.
Yeah, that would...
like, I don't think that that's what this story is.
Yeah, that would be a bit of a cop-out, I feel like. And in fact, we now know definitively that is not what is going to happen, because this story is almost certainly taking place prior to... This story, meaning the side story, is almost certainly taking place prior to the mainline story.
Yes.
For a couple of reasons.
Definitely.
One, we can metagame it a little in knowing that the trailer for Zendikar Rising shows Akiri and Nahiri, and it shows Nahiri kind of freezing Akiri and apologizing to her and pushing her off of
which is fucked up.
This floating rock. And so, I mean, and in the latter story, the mainline story, we see Akiri and Zareth, as well as their other two companions, who we'll talk about soon, joining up with Nahiri and going on this quest to Murasa, as we've learned. And so it seems that that is where we will get to that trailer moment of pushing her off. But if that's the case, then obviously this story of the two of them swinging and taking jobs and things like that is likely not going to happen.
Right.
I also find it kind of interesting in this side story where Akiri alludes to planeswalkers. Like at one point she says walkers later on, but earlier on she's just talking about the beings from the other world that caused this Eldrazi nonsense to occur and who kind of showed up and left, leaving ruin in their wake, right?
Yeah,
is how she put it.
Doesn't make sense, but okay.
Well, and
Like the Eldrazi did that, not the Planeswalkers.
Right. I guess her point is that, like, because your point was like the Planeswalkers saved you, right? They saved Zendikar, which is true. I agree. I think maybe her point is that they saved Zendikar and then left, not waiting to make sure that the plane fixed itself, like made sure that it was better afterwards.
What are they gonna do?
Well, that's a different story.
I think she's just blaming the Planeswalkers in general, all of them, I guess, for the fact that the Eldrazi were there.
Right.
Even though that's only really Nahiri's fault.
Right. And my only, like, this story regime versus old story regime thing that I wanted to talk about this week, I think, is with relation to people knowing about Planeswalkers now. Even in War of the Spark, right, they talk about, or I guess it was Gathering Storm, Ral Zarek talking to Niv Mizzet and trying to keep the Planeswalker thing a secret even from Niv Mizzet.
Right.
And Niv's like, no, I know what Planeswalkers are. I've known for a while.
It's like, I'm a freaking dragon, dude. Right. Like, I've been around.
Well, not even a dragon, a Draco Genius, right? Like, that's literally his name. And so his intelligence level is such that you could even if you were still of the old opinion that like Planeswalkers shouldn't be advertising that fact to everyone, you could look at that and say, you know what, Niv Mizzet understands or gets it. That makes sense. Niv Mizzet can get it, right? He's smart enough.
He's allowed to. He's allowed to know.
Yeah, and we'll let that one slide. But now everyone on Ravnica knows.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, we were talking about this a bit, and your point was, you know, people may not have had time to like stop and think like, what are planeswalkers? I wonder, while they're like running for their lives from Lazotep-coated zombies
like,
or whatever.
I don't know if that's really what they were so worried about at the moment.
Right.
While they were like trying to survive.
Sure.
And
so
not succeeding.
Right. And so the regular denizens of Ravnica, that's a very good point. What I brought up though as the contrast to that is that the guild leaders absolutely now all know.
Yeah. Because
they were in that meeting with all of the planeswalkers talking about their plan, or at least guild representatives, right? I think there was like, it wasn't, the Simic guild leader wasn't there, but one of the representatives was. But whatever. Like, there's like at least a representative from every guild who now definitively knows what planeswalkers are, etc. So like, you could argue that most of Ravnica will likely know and understand. So that's an entire plane, fully understanding planeswalkers. Now you have Zendikaris who are saying, we know about those people that came from the faraway world and, you know, then left to go back to those faraway worlds.
Randomly talking about it like it's totally normal and cool to just have that conversation. And it's like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to really know anything about them.
Right.
And so it's one thing if like you were just observant enough at the fact that like you've experienced all of this nonsense with the Eldrazi, but like you're not going to refer to them as walkers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm that's why I bring up, I'm curious if that's the new regime thing that they're just doing away with, like, they don't think it makes sense for people not to understand planeswalkers.
Right,
they don't think it's weird.
The whole concept of people not knowing what planeswalkers are.
Or, in contrast, which I think would be a much cooler way of doing it, is if a lot of planes start figuring out about planeswalkers and it becomes a problem. And that's your new through-line story beat, is that planeswalkers are going to start to realize that these people on the plane, these like plane-locked individuals, are finding out about planeswalkers and it's becoming a problem for them, and they're becoming no longer welcome there because these people are like, you are invaders from another world, please leave, because every time you show up, terrible nonsense happens.
I mean, that's a fair point.
Right. And so that seems like
leave.
Right. And that seems like a much better through-line story to me. Now, my bias says, as of right now, because these stories are trending upwards compared to what we've had recently, but are still not feeling perfect yet. And so I'll say that my bias is leaning towards that not being the case, because that seems way too cool for what is
complex.
Yes, for what is being led to here. But I can keep my fingers crossed. Let us know in the comments what you think as well, as always.
But maybe it's just that they just figure, okay, well, Ravnicans kind of figured it out because of what happened on Ravnica. And Zendikari's kind of figured it out because of what happened on Zendikar.
Sure.
No other planes will necessarily figure it out unless something like what happened on those two planes happens on their plane as well. Like maybe Innistrad.
I was just going to say. So like what happened on Innistrad.
And they are doing Innistrad sets coming soon.
Vampires and werewolves at the end of 2021.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only other thing I wanted to talk about with this first story before we move on to the other one is, first of all, they did an amazing job of showing the connections between Akiri and Zareth. I will shout out to Amy, because Amy at one point during the story you're very good at it. I was not thinking that. You were like, are they together? And I was like, I don't think so. And then in the main story, when they're there, it's like, you know, Zareth looks at her with affection, and she puts her hand on his, or vice versa. And I looked at Amy and was like, oh, okay, my bad, you're right. Again, I've said it. I think I said it.
He said, like, oh, we can, like, go off together and, like, live happily ever after, or whatever thing he said. And I was like, oh, so they're a couple? And he's like, no, I don't think so. And I'm like, okay.
As with...
I don't see how they're not, but all right. Because, I don't know, maybe, you know, maybe people say that about, like, their business partners or whatever, right?
Yeah, sure. Ask, but between the two of us, ask who figured out that they wanted to be, you know, with the other person forever first. Because it was definitely her. And I needed to figure it out. It took me a while. But anyway, that's another story for another time. But we got there. I wanted to point out that I thought it was interesting in this story that...
Well, and I called that,
Jason Lily were exes.
Jason Lily were exes, like, from the beginning, and he's like, just shut up. He, like, kept on saying it.
It's like legit the second episode or third episode of JaAR that we ever did, and Amy's sitting there going, they're exes. And I'm like, and she's like, they're exes. So, yeah, if you go back to, like, the JaAR playlist and watch, like, episode 3, the one with, like, an unwelcome visitor or whatever it's called. Don't ask me how I remember that, but it's something like that. That is the first episode where you talk about it, and for years, man, it's been going on since then. So that's definitely been a thing.
And now there's like finally proof that they're exes.
There was
what story
in like Ixalan or whatever, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like not until Ixalan.
Right, because Jace had flashbacks of like himself and Liliana, and like he's putting his clothes back on or whatever, and Liliana's talking to him. Like, and Vraska sees that. I think that's the first time that they officially flat out said it.
Right.
Which, you know, I gave my appropriate congratulations to her then. But in this story, I thought it was interesting. Akiri is flashing back to the battle, and obviously, it's a very traumatic experience for her, and it's legit, like, paragraphs of italicized text that are, like, flashbacks and her remembering, like, intricate details of what it looked like in that area, etc. It was very traumatic, unsurprisingly, in that type of a situation that we could probably only imagine, but still could imagine that it would be very traumatic for somebody. But then mentions how she and her group were the living. And the word battle and the word living were not at the beginning of the sentence, and yet were capitalized. And again, for battle, I guess it makes sense. Like, you're trying to emphasize, like, the battle. This thing that happened that was such a defining moment in your life, such a traumatic experience for you that you're giving it... I don't even want to necessarily use the word reverence, but I think that people know what I'm getting at with that.
Yeah,
like, the gravity of the situation, like, by
battles
capitalizing
are named,
it. Yeah.
And if you don't know the name,
sure,
you call it the battle.
The battle with a capital letter. I don't fully understand the living thing.
Or if in this world they aren't named yet, because they are named in our world.
Well,
it sort of makes sense.
Well, yes, no, that again, battle made sense to me. Living did not.
No, it didn't.
No.
Interesting. Okay.
Just because she says that they're the living, so like, does that mean that they're like? It's like that's their.
They're the ones that survived it.
Their race, or you know what I mean? Like, it's not, but like that's why it's capitalized. It's their title. At that point.
I mean, it's their title or just the gravity of it.
Sure. Okay.
No one else lived.
Yeah, that's true. And we get that a lot in the main story as well, which, by the way, I think we can move on to if that's okay.
So I think they're kind of like referring to everyone that was left.
Yeah.
After the battle happened.
As the living.
Right.
Sure. That makes sense. All right. Yeah, fair enough. Interesting. We'll get to that in this story, because there was an amazing moment. My favorite moment of this story refers back to that a bit. So, yes, on to Race to the Murasa Skyclave. Again, I said by A.T. Greenblatt, returning this week. You wanted to talk about, you're going to be in charge of a lot of the stuff at the beginning here, which is totally great.
Oh, okay.
So first you wanted to talk about, at the beginning of the story, Nahiri is discussing the fact that she realizes that she needs help on her quest for the lithoform core.
Yeah.
And that she's frustrated by that because she's realizing that without Nissa, she wouldn't have gotten the key in the first place. And so now she needs help, which she's not happy about.
Right.
And I know you kind of...
I was like, oh, okay, does that mean that, like, she, like, couldn't have actually gotten to it if not for having someone with her? And when you read it again, you were like, no, I think it just, she felt like she needed help. But I don't know.
Right.
I think it sort of straddles the line there.
Okay, that's fair. Because it mentioned that she felt like she wouldn't have survived without Nissa there, which I referenced back to, like, the beast that was attacking her.
Oh, okay.
Nissa saved her life, and so if Nissa wasn't there, and she had gone only on her own, she would likely be dead. Because it caught her by surprise, because she, like, underestimated it, essentially, to a degree. So that's how I took it.
I took it much more like, okay, she, like, knows the legends surrounding it enough to understand that in order to actually enter the chamber, or in order to actually take it from its spot, she would need to not just be her. She would need to have someone else with her. And maybe the specific characteristics of that person as well.
I definitely didn't take it that way, but it's an interesting way of looking at it, and obviously we'll see if that comes into play.
I guess that's the difference between just someone who just reads these stories as a fan of magic and someone who reads these stories as a fan of history and artifacts and, you know.
That's fair. That's definitely fair. To go along with...
stories that kind of correspond with that enough to be able to be like, well, you know, and it made me think of, like, Amonkhet, you know, with the initiates.
Yeah.
And how, like, you can't just go in there by yourself because you'll lose. You'll die.
They had to work together in their crops.
Right. But it wasn't just you needed other people to help you through it. You literally had to, like, take hearts from people.
Yeah, that was messed
and
up.
Shit.
That's messed up.
So, like, if you didn't have more people with you, you were shit out of luck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you couldn't, you know, steal their heart and kill them.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Nahiri not being able to do it on her own and kind of needing whatever, you referenced as well, not necessarily loving the line that Nahiri says in response, just because more could be read into it. But Nahiri's line of, I am who I need to be.
Yeah. Because they kind of, like, threw that in there, I guess, as, like, a joke or whatever, but as if to just say, like, oh, she is powerful, she's adaptive, she's whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, actually, like, I love that they put that line in there because it's, I thought it was so appropriate for how, like, off the characterization was in the last story. I just feel like the character just is exactly what Wizards feels is convenient at the time, as opposed to who Nahiri actually is.
Right.
So yeah, I thought that was perfect because they were just blatantly writing on the page. Well, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what this character says or does. Because she's not her character. She's just, you know, a way for us to get the story beats out. Bullshit.
Okay. And going along with that, right, just going along with your kind of discussions regarding Nahiri and her character now versus then, and etc. The other thing that you were frustrated by is the fact that she kept reminding herself to be patient. Or kept talking about how she was reminding herself.
So in the last story, they kept on talking about how guilty she felt for having failed. And it's really stupid because there was no reason for her to feel that way because, one, she's super confident and powerful and amazing, so there's no reason for her to just, like, harp on feeling guilty about shit she didn't have control over. And second, it wasn't her fault. It was fucking Soren, because he sucks. So, like... And they really only mentioned it, I think, once in this story. Thank God.
Once or twice, maybe.
It was twice.
Yeah, but yeah.
Maybe twice.
Sure.
But I think it was just once.
Yeah.
And I was mad about it, but I was like, okay, as long as it doesn't keep happening, I won't be more pissed about it. But in this one, they kept on referencing how she needed to, like, convince herself to be patient. And I was like, what the hell? Nahiri's, like... definitively, not even probably, definitively, the most patient character, the most patient person in this whole fucking multiverse.
It was so interesting to me when you called that out, because it made perfect sense. I hadn't thought of it, but for those of you that are not aware of Nahiri's past stories, which we learned about in Shadows over Innistrad / I think it was Eldritch Moon, but still, one of the two. We learned about how Nahiri had agreed...
She's been alive for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Right, and I believe it was...
And she spent most of her life waiting.
Right. She was locked in stone on Zendikar with the Eldrazi in case they broke free. She was there for hundreds to thousands of years. And then when she came out and the Eldrazi came out and she dealt with them and Soren didn't show, she went to Soren on Innistrad.
Yeah,
she called him out.
She was like, dude, what the hell?
Right. And they got into an argument / fight. And
because he was like, 1,000 years ago when I locked you in that stone, I was kind of hoping to never hear from you again. And she was like, well, that's really friggin' rude because you said you were going to come help me. Right. And you didn't.
But the whole time that she was locked in the stone, she wasn't impatient. She wasn't anything else. She was just waiting, as Amy said. Then she gets locked inside the Hell Vault on Innistrad. And the same thing. She's not impatient. She was upset.
Right.
But she wasn't impatient. In fact, she was super patient. So patient in the amount of time that she was there that she mentally reconstructed Zendikar for herself.
Was that in the Hell Vault?
Yes.
Okay, I thought.
Which is why
I thought it was when she was locked up with the Eldrazi.
No, because I think it was mainly because of the fact that, like, she figured that because she wasn't there to help against the Eldrazi, that Zendikar might go away. And so she felt that she needed to recreate Zendikar as best she could remember it, so that if it needed to be reformed or whatever, I guess with her stone shaping, right, her lithomancy, she could do it herself. And so
that makes sense.
Right, but that also can tie then into this present storyline arc of her wanting to return Zendikar to the way it was. Mm-hmm. Because her mind, for a very long time, was picturing Zendikar a particular way, over and over and over and over again. And it wasn't with the Royal, it wasn't with the Eldrazi, it was before all of that. And that's the Zendikar that she has in her brain, and so that's the Zendikar that she wants to recreate.
Yeah.
That's the best
but the thing
argument
is,
that I can
Zendikar
give.
Didn't go away. She doesn't have to rebuild Zendikar. It's still there, and it's fine.
Well, again, that's the only argument that I can give for her and for her rationale in this story arc so far. We talked about the fact that Akira...
argument I would give for her rationale is that, Wizards wants to come up with something.
We'll talk about
whether or not it makes sense.
We'll talk about that. As it gets to... Not today. We'll talk about that as this story progresses, because I think that's an interesting point and one that should be covered further by us in the future. I'll be
patient.
There you go. Channel Nahiri, the real Nahiri.
Yeah. Poorly characterized Nahiri.
We mentioned the return of Akiri and Zareth, along with their friends Kaza and Aura, who, as we learned in the side story, Zareth, during the battle, had, abandoned, walked away from, whatever you want to call it, had left the side of Akiri, Kaza, and Aura, and was apologizing to Kiri about that. So, in this story, the four of them are back together. Obviously, this is not before the battle, so it's after that. It's Zareth seems to have made peace with his former comrades, now current re-upped comrades.
Re-upped?
Yeah.
Okay.
He re-upped his membership,
Yeah.
and that now they're all back together. And that made sense. I thought that was cool. Based on the trailer, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because in the trailer there's only two of them. So I don't know what happens to Kaza and Aura, unless that was just kind of glossed over because they didn't want 1 million people in the trailer.
Well,
and they'll
see.
Yeah, exactly. We will get to that point.
We'll see the other stories.
Yeah.
What happens.
Speaking of the characters and their names and etc., there was something that bothered me in this story quite a bit.
God, yes.
And in one sentence, they did it. We were doing it, I think, before or I don't remember if it was on camera. I think it was off. But in this story, you had Nahiri. One of the other main characters was Akiri. Akiri, Nahiri. Okay, sure, whatever. They're core. They're both core. So maybe that makes sense that like their naming scheme is similar in that
Racist.
way. Maybe. Absolutely. Then we have Zareth. Well, in this video alone, and I didn't actually do it on purpose, I swear, but it happened because he's a pretty prominent character in the story. We've already talked about Ral Zarek. So you have Zareth and Zarek. Akiri, Nahiri. And then I think the biggest complaint I have is if you're not reading this story, if you're talking about it, you have the core. Stop and think. I said the core. What am I talking about? Am I talking about the race of people within which Akiri and Nahiri are part of? Or am I talking about the item that Nahiri is searching for, the lithoform core? All I said was the core. What am I referring to? So if this is being read aloud to you, or an audio book or something to that effect, right? Because there are awesome people on this platform and many others who are doing that as well with these stories, that they are creating audio versions of them, which makes it more accessible for people as well. That's really cool, except the core.
I had to keep going, okay, this is what he's talking about.
You have to like heavily focus. When you hear the word, you're like heavily focused, like, okay, give me the rest of the context.
Yeah.
All right, there it is. What else were they saying in that sentence? I was just focused on what core we were referring to.
Yep.
So I wrote here, right, because I'm not ignorant. This is fantasy stories. You're making up names for things. I get that. Except lithoform core, obviously, core of is just a concept. The core of something is the center of it. I get that. So that's fine. But then you combine it with the core, the people, K-O-R, right? That's made up. That's not real. That's for fantasy. That's for Magic the Gathering. Nahiri, Akiri. As far as I know, those are made up names. I'm not aware of anyone that, any particular culture that like uses that name like normally or regularly or even irregularly. Although if you know of any, let me know. I would love to hear it. Obviously, I'm aware of people within the Magic community naming their children, right, as they get older. I know of people naming their children things like Jace and Chandra and things like that. And that's fine. But so, again, Akiri, Nahiri, Core, Zareth, Zarek. I get it. It's fantasy. I just felt like in this story it was very egregious that there were so many, right? If it was one out of the three, okay. But the fact that it was so many was just frustrating after
It's
a while.
annoying.
Yeah. So it's just something to point out. It's not like this story sucks because it's just, hey.
It just makes it feel lazy and repetitive.
To contrast that, because hey, positives and negatives, right? The first section of this story where Jace shows up is my favorite part of this entire story. I thought that it was so well done. Jace shows up, and he kind of gets called out by Mara? I'm unsure. Mara. I'm going to say Mara. But this person, Mara, calls him out. Mara is amazing, and I love her. And I would like to see more of her forever. Just throwing that out there. And yet, she only had a few lines, right? And there are absolutely those characters in stories that show up, they have a few lines, they make an impact, they're not on cards, and that's a thing, right? With Wizard's staff asking, like, hey, what character do you want to see on cards coming up? So, Gisa and Geralf was a big one for us. After we read the game story, which was one of my favorites, we read it with our friends, and then realized that they weren't on cards.
Right.
And we wanted that, and we eventually got it. It was cool. Now we have Mara, and I want Mara on a card very badly, and I've only just read this story once a little bit ago. Here's my reasoning for it. Mara was on screen, if you will, right? Was the subject for a very short period of time, and made such an impact on at least me personally. She went up to Jace. Jace comes to realize that part of her face is messed up from corruption. She's like limping, and her arm is messed up as well. She's got some deformities because of the corruption from fighting the Eldrazi. Now, I'm aware of, right? Straight white male, I get it. Bear with me if you will. I'm aware of the discussions regarding diversity and inclusivity in these stories and the import of that. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that can change and improve over time. Sooner the better. This type of a character in Mara is a great way of being inclusive. Because Mara, in my opinion, can absolutely be read as a burn victim. That's the real world equivalent that I can think of, because we don't have Eldrazi corruption, right? But it sounds so similar to what a person who is a burn victim has to deal with, right? The injuries to the one side of her body in this case, the deformities to her face, and yet in this story she was fantastic.
Yeah, but I mean, there's burning in Magic the Gathering.
Sure.
So, like, you could just actually have a burn victim.
Sure. You could have that as well. Absolutely. I'm just saying, like, this, I don't know. This is the first that I have seen, known of, where that's the case. Because I think it could be argued in this world of Magic the Gathering where there is magic, that if someone were burned, that could be healed with healing magic. But the Eldrazi, who are this extraplanar force that are unknown to all in terms of their psychology, their makeup, their physiology, etc., that may not be as easily healed with magic. So whereas you could say, like, hey, don't they have magic? Can't they just, like, help a burn victim in terms of, like, oh, there's fire spells, there's got to be healing for the damage from fire spells. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's my initial, off the top of my head, reaction. I would love people's opinions down in the comments as well.
When you get burned and you heal, the texture of your skin is the only thing really that's different. It doesn't mean that you have, like, a wound. So, like, you've healed.
I mean, it depends on the severity of the burn. You could have nerve damage, which is what I was talking about with the limp. You could absolutely have drastic lasting effects. It is absolutely not just on the surface.
Okay.
After you've healed.
But that's not really what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I mean, nerve damage you can't really heal.
Correct.
But yeah, I mean, I just, if there were a burn victim in this, like, healing and not looking like, to a point where you don't look like you're a burn victim, is...
Okay. I assumed there could be cosmetic magics as well. That's all I was getting at. And that it wouldn't necessarily work against Eldrazi. But all I'm saying is I think that Mara could be a really cool character in that way in Magic. I also really appreciated that when she went on to the memorial, that she invited Jace to join her, Jace could hear her whispering apologies to her friends who passed away during that fight, and apologizing to them that she couldn't do more. That's so cool. So cool to me. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed that even someone who was so affected by that fight, she's still apologizing to her friends. She still feels bad. I'm not saying she should. I'm saying I appreciated reading that, because survivor's guilt is absolutely a thing, and it sucks. Because the phrase, "why wasn't it me? It should have been me," things like that, have absolutely been said, and it sucks. That feeling feels terrible. And so to have a character embody that in this way here was great. I really appreciated that. Like I said, she as a character really stood out to me, and I liked this whole section a lot. A lot. Okay. So we talked about a good thing. Then I wanted to talk about the fact that it was Jace. It was a Jace section that was that good. Because, if you'll allow, when I started this section, I looked over and I could notice that when I mentioned it was Jace, I saw you roll your eyes a bit. Because you were like, oh,
no,
great.
I didn't roll my eyes. I just said, great.
So, just the idea of, like, being frustrated that it's a Jace section. And again, as has been done in the past, and I really appreciate it, to combat people who may be tired of Jace, even after the break from the Gatewatch that we took for a little while, and after War of the Spark, and the promise that it wasn't going to be Gatewatch-centric of the main 5 characters over and over and over again. Jace coming back can frustrate people. I can absolutely understand that. This first section for this story, he was in the last one, but for this story, this first section having Jace in it, after I was done reading it, I thought to myself, yeah, I couldn't, like, I wasn't, but I wouldn't be mad at Jace here, because he was in such a cool section of the story. And so it was really good that that was the way they introduced him here, because it made it so much better as a way to introduce him, because even if you were upset with him showing up, as long as you kept reading, I think it got better from that point.
Okay. I disagree.
Fair. Well, and so then...
You shouldn't have been there.
Okay.
There's just no reason for it.
I can counter my own point by getting to the next point where I talk about a negative thing regarding Jace. Although it's not really regarding Jace. I think this was a little bit lazy in terms of storytelling, writing, etc., whatever you want to call it. This next section is a line where Jace is fighting this beast, the crab beast that's being controlled by mushrooms on its back. And Jace is dodging and rolling and fighting and trying to figure out how to beat this thing. And Jace says the line, "Why does everything on this plane want to kill me?" And I read that line, and I think that line in and of itself is supposed to be a funny throwaway line. You were talking about it before. It's supposed to be a joke, right? Ha 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 ha, yes, everything on this plane's trying to kill you because, you know, it's like wild and untamed and whatever. Okay. Except that if you think about it, but if you think about it for like 10 more seconds, you're like, wait, hold on. You've met with multiple people on this plane, right? Not just Mara. You met with the leader of the Seagate Expeditionary House and people in the Expeditionary House. And you ran into people who you had to change your appearance, but not because they were trying to kill you, but because they were like harassing you and like, you know, begging for money or support or whatever. Sure you would. But he's changing his appearance. He's changing his appearance so that he wouldn't be harassed, not so that he wouldn't be killed. And since you showed up on Zendikar, this is the first thing that's tried to kill you. So for you to say a phrase like, why does everything on this plane want to kill me, is very dumb to be said. But let's not forget the tagline of the set, everybody. The tagline of the set, for no apparent reason, is that the tagline of the set is, out here, everything wants you dead. And so if you don't think that this line from Jace of, why does everything on this plane want to kill me, absolutely attempt to mirror that tagline, you're kidding yourself. And this was so lazy. It was just lazy to me. It actually made me a little upset.
It in no way embodies Zendikar, that line.
Right.
And it's just all a load of shit.
Right.
That's all it is. And it's really angering.
It just frustrated me because it was like, you made a poor tagline for your set. I get it. And again, we'll talk about this as the stories keep going. As to, think about this for yourselves, if you're going to, especially if you're planning on continuing to watch JaAR. Think about whether this story needs to exist. Just think about that. We're going to talk about that as time goes on. But that tagline for your set was weak to start with. Out here, everything wants you dead. Is that supposed to be like, ooh, it's scary. I want to see it.
It's not just weak. It's a mischaracterization again.
Sure.
And it's really frustrating.
So this line in this story, attempting to be like, see, Jace said it, so it's real. Everything's trying to kill him. But it's not. That line in a vacuum, if you wanted to
everything was trying to kill Jace.
Well, if you wanted to quote it and put it on a card, if that's the only reason why you did it, like, that's flavor text stuff right there, right? Why does everything on this plane want to kill me? Jace Bellerin, right? That's flavor text. In your story...
Maybe if someone else said it.
In your story, surrounded by stuff that just doesn't make sense. He was with tons of people on this plane. Nothing tried to kill him until this one thing. Is he referencing because the last time he was on Zendikar, it was the Eldrazi? Because, no, the elementals helped him in the fight against the Eldrazi. The people of Zendikar helped him in the fight against the Eldrazi. The merfolk, the core, the humans, etc. They all helped him. So it's not everything on this plane wants to kill you.
Right.
In this story...
most of what he did on Zendikar was, like, try to figure out the Hedrons.
Talk to Ugin and get his advice.
Right. He wasn't sitting there fighting off creatures constantly.
Right. So... It's
dumb.
Right. It's just
so dumb.
It's just a lazy attempt at making your tagline better.
Actually work, even though it doesn't at all.
And prior to this story coming out at all, I had seen people discussing the fact that the tagline is quite weak. It's just weak. But like I said, I want people to think about whether this story needs to exist. And I don't mean whether Magic story needs to exist. Not what I'm saying. Weekly Magic stories should be here every week. Well, every week that there is a story to tell. But did this story need to be told? We'll talk about that. And then the second to last thing, the last thing that I want to talk about, and then I'll pass it over to you for the finale here. The crab beast that Jace fights that's controlled by the mushrooms. I thought it was cool, but I'm also aware of Pokemon as an existing thing, and Parasect is a Pokemon that exists as a crab creature that is controlled by fungi. And I know that Parasect and Paris were inspired by actual bugs that can have their brains controlled by fungus, and the fungus feeds off the bug. Excuse me. The bug loses all autonomy and just becomes a victim of this fungi, and loses all of its, abilities to think for itself and act and etc. in its own interest. That's what Parasect was themed after, but it was a crab bug hybrid with mushrooms on its back. That was Paris, and then when it evolved, the mushroom takes over as Parasect And now the creature is no more, and it's the fungus that's controlling it. So you just made a big parasect that fought Jace and used echolocation, but you made it a crab beast controlled by fungi. I was just surprised. It seemed to me like if you took anything else at all, anything but a crab, it wouldn't be a blatant ripoff of the first generation of Pokemon. Like, it's a blatant ripoff. It's the exact same thing. Anything else, a pig, a dog, pick an animal.
Yeah.
Anything but a crab creature. It wouldn't be a blatant ripoff.
Can get parasites. I mean,
right. And again, if it were a bug of some kind, right? Even if it were a giant insect of some kind, one of the geopedes, right? We saw that last week. Put it on one of the geopedes, right? Have a geopede with mushrooms all over its back. Okay, that alludes to the real world thing that is bugs being influenced by fungi. But instead, you made it a crab thing, which is just Pokemon. Okay, I guess. I guess.
You know.
And last but not least, Amy, you wanted to discuss Nissa saving Jace, but then interacting with him after saving his hide.
So she comes around and saves him, which, fine. I mean, if I were Nissa, I would probably save his life. Ugh, probably. Maybe. It's likely I would save his life. But it's not likely I would talk to him after that. After the conversation that they had in the last story, there'd be no reason for me to talk to him. No.
As opposed to them being buddy-buddy, which is what they were in this instance here.
It was just like nothing had happened, you know. She just has to be okay with the fact that he's just a piece of shit.
Okay, let me ask you, just to assuade other people from having to ask, how in this instance, how was he a piece of shit?
In this instance, he wasn't a piece of shit.
Oh.
In the last story, he was a piece of shit to her.
Okay, sure. Yep.
So,
okay. I guess I read it as her being happy that he was there to help. Because, finally, right? That he, actually came to his senses.
Tough. He comes here to help? Good. You make him help.
Okay.
So that he can be of use.
Okay.
That's it. So you save his life, make him help, tell him to go fuck himself. The end.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, speaking of the end, as we heard, the side story will continue next week with Akiri and Zareth. I mean, obviously this story will continue next week as well. I'm curious if it will keep with the same, I guess until they meet up, if it'll keep with the same dichotomy of Nahiri story first, Jace story second, because that's what it was last week, that's what it was this week. And whereas
that means that Jace is actually gonna be in the story for more than just this one.
Correct. He's in the set. He's one of the 3 planeswalkers. So that's what the set is revolving around. I'm curious to see if and when we will find out how the black influence gets into Nissa.
Yeah.
If that comes across in the story at all, or if that's just something where they're like, hey, we needed a black planeswalker, and it doesn't really make sense for Nahiri or Jace, so it was Nissa. We'll see. But it does get all 5 colors in there somehow, so...
It absolutely would make way more sense for Nahiri, since they've just randomly made her a villain in this.
Yeah, I think they're trying to move away from black being the character of villains. Like, Bolus was part black, you've got Liliana, who was a villain for a while, but you also have, Tezzeret, and then you have Obnixilis, who's a villain, but you had Dovin Bond, he was white and blue, he was a villain. You had Tezzeret, he was blue, or is blue, he's a villain. So with Nahiri being a villain in this one as white-red, it's just kind of showing, I guess, trying to diversify the colors of their villains. Because it's not really a good look when your company's getting called out for lack of diversity and you're like, what do your villains look like? And you're like, well, look at all our black villains. It's like, we get that that's not what it means, but we also don't get that that's not what it means. So, you know, I think they're trying to move away from having black be the color of evil.
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter because Nahiri's not, but...
Correct. And that's obviously another point. So we will be back next week with a continuation of the side story, as well as the continuation of the main story, just not a true, part 2 of 2, which is what it is for the side story. If you are not aware, we have been streaming on this channel every Monday and Friday, so if you are watching this video the day it comes out, tomorrow we are streaming from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern. We are going to be...
Please check it out.
Hopefully continuing our Tinkerer's Cube draft. I actually have to check and see if it is still on Arena.
It's still there.
It should be, but I'll double check. But regardless, we will be doing some things on MTG Arena. If you have some time...
We'll see what's there.
Yeah, we would love for you to come hang out, say hello, chat with us. Our Monday streams have been going super well.
Yeah.
We're going to be, as we said, we'll be reevaluating our Friday streams as best we can. Things may change up there, but stay tuned to this channel. You can check out our other channels as well, especially Video Games for All, but also Gluten Free for All. Those logos will be popping up on the screen for you to be able to click and subscribe to those. Once you've subscribed to any and all of our channels, including this one, you can ring that bell and you will get notifications for whenever a new video comes out, as well as whenever we go live, which again, on this channel, streaming Monday and Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time here in the U.S.
Each week.
Yes. So, I do hope everybody enjoyed this particular episode of JaAR. Again, we got to talk about some positive things, some negative things, kind of... go back and forth on some topics a bit. That's kind of what we do. But we would love for you to join in the discussion as well.
Yes, we want to hear what you have to say.
Yes,
please.
we don't necessarily need you to say, I agree with Joe on this, I agree with Amy on this. You can have your own opinion.
That's not the point.
No, we want you to have your own opinions. If you do agree with us, awesome. That's cool to hear. Thank you. But also, if you have your own opinions, they are more than welcome, because the more perspective, the better on stuff like this. We would love to hear from you, because you joining in with your fellow commenters to talk with us about these stories helps to have us all show off our...
#Vorthos Pride.
It's super nice to be back. We really hope everybody is enjoying these stories or these videos as much as we are. Shout outs to everybody who was given such love in the comments last week. We saw it all. We appreciated it all. You're all amazing individuals, so thank you. It is really nice to be back. And we hope that we are here for much longer to come.
Yeah.
Because you're all great, and we want to keep hanging out with you and talking about things that are much more positive, right? Yeah. There's still some things that are frustrating, but it's, like I said, it's trending upward, and I'd like it to continue.
Yeah,
so.
But when the overall, is, well, it was meh. As opposed to, it was fucking terrible, then we're doing okay.
Yeah, we're getting there. So, like I said, I hope it continues in that direction. But regardless, we hope that everybody enjoyed. Please feel free, like I said, comments down below. Please. Also, do all that other fun YouTube stuff I mentioned. Subscribing, ringing the bell. You can like the video. You can share it, etc. All that stuff truly helps us out immensely. We're not planning on going anywhere, but those numbers, they help out YouTube a lot. They help out us even more. So... we really do appreciate any and all support that you are willing to give to us here at the Geek for All family of channels. And for us here, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.